Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. As we always do, we're breaking down the basics of all political issues so you can decide. Let's talk youth, leadership development, politics, and faith, and where and how they all intersect. And I've got the expert on this powerful combination with me today. Dr. Jeff Myers is president of Summit Ministries and one of America's most respected authorities on Christian worldview, apologetics, and youth leadership development. He's the author of 18 books, including the Understanding the Faith, Understanding the Times, and Understanding the Culture textbooks, which are studied by tens of thousands of students. Dr. Myers, you have a lot of insight to share with us today, and I can't thank you enough for joining me on Politically Basic today.
Kyle, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. It's, they're 15% of this population, but they're 100% of the future.
Absolutely. Well, you are such a fascinating person who's become really an inspiration to so many in the faith community in our nation. Tell us a little bit about your story. What led you to become so passionate about what you're doing for younger generations?
Well, Kyle, I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and when I was a small child, the city fell into riots so bad that as many people were killed, as many buildings destroyed, as many people went to jail, as many people went to the hospital in Detroit as in all of the United States of America in 2020, just to give you a sense of the scale. And so I grew up in a very fragile environment. I was offered hard drugs for the first time at 7 years of age.
Wow.
I remember watching the body of a heroin overdose victim be wheeled out of the house across the street in our middle-class neighborhood. I remember cowering under my bed at the sound of a gunshot and a police battle taking place in the street. And so my parents decided we came here for job opportunities, and they were great job opportunities for them, but they couldn't stay, couldn't raise a family there. So they left, along with about half the population of the city. My parents moved back to their roots in Kansas and Oklahoma. And when I was about 10, we moved from Detroit, Michigan to Great Bend, Kansas, and from a big church to a tiny little church. And I was still that tough sort of Detroit kid. I have a lot of questions. I'm pretty cynical. I'm skeptical. When I go to church, I'm not asking questions like, where does the Apostle Paul say this or that? I'm asking questions like, how do we know there is a God? How do we know that the Bible's description of God is what God would actually be like? How could there be a good God when there's so much evil in the world? And I couldn't get answers to my questions. I knew those people loved me, but I could not get answers to those questions. And so I decided quietly that when I graduated from high school, I was going to graduate from church. And I don't think I'm alone. About 70% of young people who are significantly involved in church in their high school years are no longer even attending church by the time they reach their mid-20s. They've lost the plot. And this is not just the plot of, another faith community or a way to get political power. It is a plot about reality itself. Jesus said, if you follow my teachings, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And so that became a passion for me because I went through it. And Summit Ministries played a huge role in my life. My parents arranged for me to come to this program. I walked up to the founder, David Noble, and I said, man, I hope you have a lot of answers because I have a lot of questions. And he just smiled and said, at Summit, we aren't afraid of questions. First time in my life I'd ever heard that. Every Christian I knew was afraid of questions, everyone. And to find a community of people where they were willing to dig hard and seek the truth, even if it took them from theology to philosophy to ethics to science to psychology, sociology, politics, law, all of these different areas, they were willing to dig for it. And so now, all these years later, I have the privilege of being the president of that ministry, and we train in our intensive program 70,000 young people every year, including about 1,800 in in-person 11-day conferences that we hold here at our headquarters in Colorado and also in Georgia.
You can instantly understand, hearing your background, why you're resonating with young people who are seeking right now. I mean, you came up through the school of hard knocks. You're not that kind of believer who was treated with kid gloves and had it cushy. And that has led you to be that kind of seeker that's going to dig in and kind of push the boundaries and really question it. And I think that's where a lot of our younger kids are right now. They're not necessarily getting this kind of education or exposure to faith and the Bible, certainly not in school. Church attendance, as you just mentioned, is down. And And they're facing some really difficult challenges here. Like, it is not an easy time to be facing an entire future ahead of you. So I can instantly, absolutely see why your kind of style and the road that has led you here is really resonating with them. And we're grateful that it is. You just have such a tremendous heart for the youth and have really extensively researched. I mean, just like what you said, you dig in, you ask why, and you've been given that environment to be able to do so. But you've taken that and done so much with it. You extensively have researched the facts surrounding very serious issues like transgender ideology and what's going on in Israel, a nation that has such an important connection to the United States and what happens here in the United States. So I want to just pause there for a second and hear from you on Israel specifically. It is a topic of an election season. It's the topic of an entire year. A lot of different narratives and rhetoric are coming out that I think have taken the American people by surprise. But you make some connections there to what younger people are dealing with. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I think I'll like to paint in a little bit of the background first. Several years ago, maybe a decade or so ago, there was a trend that nobody noticed in the United States of America, but it was nevertheless an absolutely real trend that has changed the course of our nation. And it was a trend away from truth. People used to say, I seek the truth. Now people say, I speak my truth. When that tipping point occurred for this rising generation, we call them Gen Z, all sorts of negative things began to happen. First of all, young adults didn't have a sense of purpose. If there's no truth, then what's the point of life? 75% say they do not have a sense of purpose that gives meaning to their lives. They also quit taking risks because if there's no truth, then why would you ever take a chance on anything? That would be, you should live in fear because you can't really make a difference. And even if you did, you wouldn't even know that it was a difference. So this is the environment. And then when October 7th occurred and this Hamas terrorist group attacked southern Israel with such ferocity, slaughtering, raping, mutilating 1,200 Israeli civilians and taking 250 hostages, which would, by the way, with the population equivalent, be like somebody coming into San Diego and slaughtering 42,000 people and taking 12,000 hostages. America would demand a response. And so Israel started to respond. And I thought, well, of course, people are going to say to their Jewish neighbors, hey, I know you're under threat. I know there are people who hate Jews, and I want to be here. I'll be here to support you. The exact opposite happened, especially with Gen Z. The Harvard University CAPS poll asked this question: do you think that the Hamas terrorists were justified in their actions because of Palestinian grievances? 9% of people who are over 65 said yes, they were justified. 9%, it's fewer than 1 in 10. You know what the figure was for Gen Z? 60% said they believe the Hamas terrorists were justified in killing men, women, and children and raping and mutilating them because of Palestinian grievances. I knew at that point that the tipping point that we went through a decade or so ago when people just gave up on truth, in fact, post-truth was the word of the year several years ago. I knew when that happened that it would be bad. I had no idea that it would be this bad, that we have an entire generation that has become radicalized by postmodern and Marxist ideology. So we have to address the ideas. And if it's not happening in church, Kyle, where's it going to happen, right? Because it's not going to happen in their classroom. They're never going to get the truth at a government-funded school. And if the pastors don't bring it up, then the students they automatically assume that what the pastor doesn't talk about is not relevant to the faith. And that's the conflict that I think we have, and why I felt so compelled to address this particular issue.
Yeah, and how is Summit Ministries doing that?
Well, we want to encourage young adults to have a biblical worldview of everything, not just of their own personal faith, but a biblical worldview that applies to even areas like economics. Because we believe that if you embrace a biblical worldview, reality itself opens up to you, and you can bring blessing and flourishing to the nations of the earth. So we take the toughest issues. You mentioned transgender. That was the topic that we tackled last year. This year, we chose Israel as that core issue because it seems like an impossible situation. But we want to help students develop a biblical worldview first by helping them understand the biblical roots of their faith, even the Hebrew roots of their faith. And then we want them to understand the theopolitical, not just the geopolitical issues surrounding Israel. And that gives us the opportunity to talk about just war, how we human beings should treat one another, how a nation can be strong even when its people are divided, even how people can be happy. This is a strange fact, but it's true, and I've documented it. Israel is the fourth happiest nation in the world. Really? It is surrounded by nations that want to destroy it. It is under attack at all times. This is a nation, the entire nation is not as big as the state of New Jersey. And yet, you would think you would just live in constant fear and shell shock, but they don't. They're the fourth happiest nation in the world. The United States is 15th, by the way. What can we learn from Israel, which has all kinds of issues? I mean, you want to talk about diversity? There are people from 103 nations speaking 82 different languages in Israel. We have two major political parties that fight with each other. They have 55 political parties. How on earth do you maintain a common thread, a sense of we that brings that settledness and that happiness, even in the most difficult situations? It seems to me we have a lot of lessons to learn from our Israeli friends.
We do, and no excuses, right? They're doing that so well with so many challenges they're facing every day. Jeff, where do you think this is coming from? I don't think that you are alone by any means in your shock and surprise after October 7th about the reaction to it. There was the general sense and expectation of outrage, and yet very quickly that script got completely flipped. And there were calls to stop the genocide of the Palestinian people, which was factually and narratively very incorrect. So where is that generating from? Can you pinpoint it?
I think I can. I actually went to Israel during the war, to the war zone, and spent time there with a small group of leaders, one of whom had a son who grew up in Christian schools all the way through college. And he said to his dad, "Why are you going there? Why are you supporting the genocide?" And you think, wait a second. I can understand why a young person who's postmodernist, who doesn't believe there is such a thing as truth, might say that. But a Christian, what's going on? And kind of what happened, I think, is that over the last several decades in the United States of America, we have subtly embraced this oppressor versus oppressed mindset, that everything has to be viewed through the lens of power. And all you have to do then to be righteous is figure out who is suffering more. And whoever's suffering more is by definition more righteous. And people who are suffering more can justly use any means to defend themselves against their oppressors. Christians bought into this because, well, there are a lot of Christians who, they say what's important about Jesus is that he suffered and died, and, that because of his great suffering, he was more righteous. They're missing the theology, but they'll say that and say, therefore, whoever's suffering more in the world, that's who we're going to support. But the underlying assumption given to them by the professors is we will tell you who the oppressors are. Then you can figure out who to stand up for. And you can have a secular kind of salvation just by standing up for people you think are being wronged. And as you mentioned, it completely misses the truth of the situation, what's really taking place. It denies that Israel has a right to exist, and it denies that Hamas is the real enemy here, because it is. This terrorist group is the enemy of the Palestinian people as well as the enemy of Israel.
And what are you seeing happen with the students who come through your programs when they are offered the facts and the history and what is true and what's being documented? What kind of shift are you seeing in their mindsets? What's the reaction?
It's extraordinary to see the reaction. I would at Summit, it's a little bit hard to describe because I don't know any place else in the United States where this happens. We create an environment where students are safe to think, not safe spaces like safe from having to think or safe from being triggered, but a safe place to think. So we encourage them to bring all of their toughest questions with them and we will grapple with them. We'll just sit and walk alongside of them. They listen to lectures, they do Q&As, they have one-on-one mentoring meetings and so forth. But I would say, I've had 8 hour-long Q&A sessions with students this summer, about 1,000 of them. And they came in with really tough questions about Israel, about what a biblical worldview is, what constitutes a just war, and all of that. And, you mentioned the word facts. I think a lot of people say, we just have to tell a better story. I don't think that's true. What this generation is looking for is the factual basis for what they believe. So I'll just give you an example. We did a poll of Gen Z with Scott Rasmussen, who's a very respected pollster. And we asked questions like, do you think that Israel's greater wealth and military power makes its cause unjust? And by the time we did that poll, which was at the end of March, the figure was down to 47% from 60%. So we were starting to see some people backing away from this idea that, Hamas is righteous and go kill all the Jews and all of that kind of thinking. But we asked them, do you think that's true? The 47% said, yes, I think Israel is unjust. Then to those, we asked a follow-up question. Do you think the fact that all of the Hamas leaders have become millionaires and billionaires by skimming international aid designed for destitute Gazans makes their cause unjust? And 59% said yes.
Whoa.
Within one question,
that's a good
with
question.
The presentation of one fact, more than half of them changed their minds. And 24% said, well, I'm not sure. So they either changed their mind or were cast into indecision just with the presentation of a fact.
What a concept to create an environment in which there can be free and open discourse about any topic, let alone a difficult one. I've heard so many people tell me either what they're experiencing on major college and university campuses over the last, handful of years, few years. Either it's happening to them or it's happening to their kids who are at these big named colleges and universities, and the students aren't allowed to ask questions. They are not allowed to question a professor or a lecturer. They are not allowed to just offer anything. This is the information being presented to you, and you're going to hear it, and whether or not you accept it, there will be no challenging. So if we are coming out of that time, I think that we would all be collectively sighing relief, because that's not the point of higher educational institutions. It's not the point of any educational institution. There are facts, there is history, but the only way that you understand and absorb and hold tight to that foundational understanding and learning is by asking about it. And there is no perfect orator, no perfect deliverer of that information. So I love that you guys are doing that. How, Jeff, is this affecting younger people's decisions about or thoughts on the presidential election this year? Because Israel's a huge concern, an area of discussion. But across the board, when you are helping give them an opportunity to make a decision for themselves, how is that shifting or changing, if it is at all, how they're viewing the election?
I think it is one of the key issues that's changing their minds. That's a tough one, because I would say half the students I've worked with this summer are voting in a national election for the first time. This is their first vote. They're confused. They don't know what to do. They make it all about personality issues. So I've spent a lot of time with them on this, and what I really help them do foundationally is overcome a couple of myths about politics. The first one is that politics is about the personalities. So I kind of make a little triangle, a little pyramid, and at the bottom I put principles. The foundation is principle-based, not personality-based. You make decisions based on the principles. That's what our founding fathers did. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That's a principle. Then they've developed the policies on top of that. The policies of, we're going to have a 3-part government here. That will limit corruption and enable the republic to endure. And then only at the top do they deal with personalities. Thomas Jefferson said, I sacrifice all personality differences to the principles of this union. And you have to train yourself to do that, because what happens if you watch the news? It's all the personality differences. Oh, well, Donald Trump said this, or and his hair is funny, or this, Kamala Harris said this and she laughs funny, or whatever. You don't get to the substantive issues. So that's what we're helping them do. So, for example, when Kamala Harris presents a program of price controls, we help our students understand, what is a price control? What does it mean for the government to dictate the prices of things? What has happened in different nations when they went that route? And I show them pictures of the differences between grocery store shelves in the United States and grocery store shelves in Venezuela, where they implemented a program of price controls. We talk about life. I explain to them at Summit Ministries, listen, here's a fundamental conviction that I have. It is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And if somebody can't do that, if somebody can't say that's correct, it's always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, then I don't see how they can support the Constitution. If they're not going to protect one vulnerable group, why would I expect they would protect another one? So we go back to those kinds of things to help students build a principle-based basis for their vote. And then the second one is, they say, well, you're just choosing the lesser of two evils. To vote is to compromise. It's not true. You're using your vote to lessen evil. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's without sin. It's what a biblical worldview says. So we're not choosing somebody who's more righteous. We're choosing the principles that we think will bring our nation forward into prosperity.
Yeah, our friend Chad always says, Jesus ain't running. So we can't expect our candidates to be perfect, and they're not going to. I'm really glad to hear that this is a part and a component of what you are sharing, because where else are people, and I'm not talking just younger generations, where else is anyone in America right now getting educated on how to choose an elected representative? We're sort of being funneled into only having media, corporate media, alphabet media, social media, share through a very particular and very partisan lens. Hey, this person's good, vote for them. This person's bad, don't vote for them. And trying to determine votes based on that. But you are sharing with these kids, thank God, that there is a role that is to be filled. And this is not, it's not a popularity contest. You are not choosing the person you think you like better. You're choosing, right now, what the biggest choice in front of everyone is, you're choosing a commander-in-chief and what that entails and what that means. And so I'm encouraged to hear that Summit Ministries is tackling that, because I can't off the top of my head, unless someone's in law school, and maybe even then, I'm not sure that they're going through this process of really determining what are we looking for. And then, of course, as a person of faith, what does the Bible say about electing godly leaders? You guys are giving all of that to them. And I think it's really important. I'd really like to see more of it, because I think we're pretty off track in that department.
I agree with you. One of our partner organizations, Patriot Academy, does a really good job with this as well. So people might want to check that out.
We just had Rick Green on, and we were talking all about Patriot Academy and Constitution coaches. So I'm really glad that you guys are partnering, because this needs to be a growing effort. We've got to get our heads out of the sand here and start focusing on what's the point of this. And as you say, you're not telling these kids what to think. You're not telling them how to vote. You're saying this is the point, and educating them on their options. And you're doing what we do here at Politically Basic. And you're saying you get to decide, but we're going to tell you all the information and not just something that's really narrowly filtered. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, a vote is not alike. A vote is not alike. And a vote is also not your main citizenship responsibility. It's the beginning of the race. It's the starting gun of the race, not the race. So we have to keep those things in mind. And we also encourage our students to think about their local officials. You'll probably never get to meet a president. Most people never do. But they can all meet their mayor. Mm-hmm. They can all take their city council member out for coffee and explain what's important to them, or a school board member, and so forth. So keeping in mind all of those things, we think that the students are going to be able to make good decisions this fall.
Yeah, the down ballot voting is so critical. It's just as important as voting the top of your ballot. So that's also great. Jeff, let me ask you about this. One of the top concerns amongst Gen Z for a long time, including all the other issues they're dealing with, economic issues, and they're concerned about a range of things. But for a long time, they have expressed that one of their top concerns is lack of mental health support. So how can the church, in your estimation, understanding these worlds so well and how they work together and fit together, and understanding what younger kids are lacking right now, how can the church help them better? And what's your prediction for the role of faith for Gen Z going forward?
It's a huge question. I'm thinking in my mind of how to summarize this because we focus a lot on it, and maybe this will be helpful to people. It is true there is a mental health crisis. About 50% of young adults say they regularly struggle with anxiety and depression. It is more true for girls than for boys, although boys have these experiences as well. And it's also more true for young adults who are more liberal than who are conservative. That's strange. Why would that be the case? Well, the sociologists who've analyzed this concluded that it's true because young girls get on the internet, they start looking at TikTok videos, they become more isolated from their peers as they develop more views that are outside the mainstream. And that leads to those mental health issues. So really, truly addressing a biblical worldview, these core issues is at the heart of it. But there's an interplay between truth and relationship. And we sometimes forget that. We just think all you have to do is speak the truth and let the chips fall where they fall. But that's not true for this generation. They need to know that you care about them. Not just that you care about finding the facts, but that you care about them. And when you show that you do, it's truly profound. We spend a lot of time and effort and money on mental health resources for our students at Summit Ministries. We have adults who are involved with our program who are here as mentors. We have a lot of college-age mentors who are here working with the students. We do have therapists who are available to them, but we work very carefully to make sure we have only Christian therapists who don't believe that their therapy skills are the solution to all the world's problems. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's very important for them to know and understand. We never want to give the impression to our students that they are sick. We do not want them to wrap their identity around their victimhood status. We want them to claim victory. We want them to break down those barriers that would stop them from living a fully productive life. And when you take all of those things and put them together, it really helps. I think the intergenerational component is the secret weapon of the church. Because you think about a young adult, they're always in class, right? But if life is more like a family reunion than like a class, then we got to rethink this. If you went to a family reunion and everybody else there was 17, there's something wrong with your family. There've got to be little babies.
Yeah.
There've got to be old people. I drill my students in the following saying, I need old people and they need me. We need those intergenerational relationships. So if you're listening and you've got children or grandchildren and you haven't talked with them about tough issues, just start asking questions. How did you arrive at that conclusion? Where did you get that information? How do you know that it's true? When there's a tough one and there's disagreement, and they say, oh, Grandma, you just don't understand. You're a Nazi or whatever. It's things kids say. Then you just say, well, I can see that we have a lot of disagreement about this, but I believe that if we are side by side, we can find the truth. How do you see it?
I think you're tapping into something really important here. And yes, kids do run around calling their grandparents Nazis. That happens. I'm kidding. But certainly people are being accused of that these days. And I think there is a generational disconnect, but also what I'm hearing from a lot of the people, not just that I'm interviewing, but just that I'm talking to, is that we are trying to regroup as a culture. 2020 did us a disservice in so many ways, and one of those main ways that it just hurt us culturally was the isolation and the separation. I read some horrifying statistic the other day about how many, I guess we'd call them older Gen Z now, young people in their 20s are disowning or disconnecting from relationship with their parents. It really broke my heart because we need to be going the opposite direction. And what are we doing as a society that is pushing these generations away from each other or pitting them against each other? So I think that you're hitting on all the really valid needs right now, not just for Gen Z, but for us as a nation to come back together to kind of raise kids as a village and get back into that village living sort of concept. I think you're just spot on there. So I'm really glad to hear that. And Jeff, I think you kind of answered this, but let me ask you really directly about this. What do you think is the biggest lie being told to kids today? What's the hardest misconception for them to get past and change their minds on?
I think it's about the nature of reality itself. And I know that sounds awfully, maybe overly philosophical, but a lot of the young adults I'm working with have what Francis Schaeffer called a two-story view of reality. They view the facts, things like science are down here, but everything that's really important to me personally is up here. So this is why it's so difficult to talk to a Gen Zer about tough issues like what's going on with Israel and the Palestinians, because they've decided in their minds that what they feel is more true than what's knowable. So as long as that's the case, and if you start poking into what they feel, they can't handle it. It would be sort of like saying, if somebody says, I think I'm in love, and you said, you're not in love. That's not love. You would say, I can't believe you're saying that. I'm trying to share something with you that's really important to me, and you're saying that it doesn't exist. Because we have this idea that what really matters is what's up here. And what we're saying is, no, there's a foundation of truth down here is what gives meaning to everything else. If we can help students break down that two-story view of reality and recognize that Jesus is the source of truth, we make that case openly to our students. I tell them right up front, look, I'm going to make my opening argument here. I'm going to put all my cards on the table. I really believe that when Jesus said, if you follow my teachings, you'll be my disciples, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. That word truth in the Greek language, where we got the English, before it got translated into English, is the word aletheia. It means reality. Jesus is saying, I'm not saying you follow my teachings and you're going to know your truth. He's saying, you follow my teachings, reality itself is going to open up for you, which means that there's a bigger thing out there. There is a true north. And if you can orient to it, then you can find the sense of purpose you're looking for. You can find the meaning that you're looking for. You can live the kind of life that makes a difference for other people and is not narcissistic and self-centered. And it, doesn't resonate with every student, but the vast majority of them are like, I want that life.
Do you see that pendulum swinging back for them then? I just think you're spot on. This is the trend that we see coming down the pipeline, is trying to determine what's real and what's not. We are seeing it powerfully right now in the context of an election in which we are having images and video and text put in front of us that we don't know what's what. Is it AI? Is it misinformation? Is it real? And who can we trust and what can we believe? People are in a real twist over it. Do you see this pendulum swinging because of it, that these kids are they're hungry for it. They're seeking that truth. They want it. When they get it, you can see it click. You can see it, just kind of fill them with what they've been looking for. And if that's the case, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Where is the church fitting with that? Are they keeping pace with how this is shifting culturally for us?
I honestly don't know if the church is keeping pace with this. I just don't know that many young people who think that what is happening in their church relates to anything outside of the church. And I'm talking to a lot of young people who are regular churchgoers, but they see a disconnect. So what's the answer? I don't know. 95% of pastors, according to George Barna, say they believe the Bible speaks to today's issues. But then when George Barna handed them a list of today's issues and asked which ones have you ever addressed from the pulpit, the number who would ever address it went from 95% to 9%. So if we can't build a foundation and talk about real things in church, my students are getting the impression that church is a place where we go to talk about things that aren't real. Just to be completely frank about it.
What do you mean? Like talk about things that aren't real. What do you mean?
Well, their parents told them about the tooth fairy. That turned out to not be true. Their parents told them about Santa Claus. That turned out to not be true. Parents told them about Jesus. Is it true? No. Who's making the case? Are we just singing songs and trying to feel differently about Jesus? I support worship. It's a big part of what we do here. But if you're not digging in and acknowledging that the world is asking really hard questions, and it's not just about, how to feel better about your life. It's really tough stuff. The problem of pain and suffering. I don't know anybody who doesn't ask that. It's the one question in now the 3 generations of young adults I've worked with that's never changed. They all want to know, how can there be a good God if there's evil in the world? They're not getting answers to that question in church. They're going to assume that that's not a question that church people care about. So, I tell you, the point of, I guess I'm hopeful, not because I see that we're getting this right at this point. I'm hopeful because young adults have gotten to the point of despair. And it is on the cusp of despair that they really begin asking tough, hard questions. What is the point of life? And if we can be there to say, you know what? We're not just talking about a faith that secures your eternal salvation so that when you die, you go to heaven. We're talking about an eternal life that starts now, that affects everything, everywhere, all the time.
Yeah, there's a gap, right? And this is a referendum on the American church. Just, they've got to stand in the gap. And if they're not going to rush in there, we know who will. We're seeing it. We're seeing it play out. The government's rushing in there. Schools used to uphold the family, uphold biblical foundations, and that has completely done a 180. So I'm with you. I don't know that. I think we do know the answer, and I'll be tough and call it out. I think this is a referendum on the church. We've got to get tougher and we've got to get in there. But anyway, I will digress on that. I'll digress on that. I don't want to be tough on that. I know hard on the church, but we need the church. It's a call to. We are asking them to stand in this gap.
I've got a simple suggestion. If they're, and again, a lot of if there are pastors listening, they're like, oh, of course he has a suggestion. Everybody's got suggestions for me. But what you draw them with is what you draw them to. I have found that to be a truism about everything in life. What you draw them with is what you draw them to. So maybe just hand out blank note cards to the people in the church of all ages and say, what's the biggest question you'd like to ask God? What have you always wondered about? You're afraid that you might find that Christianity doesn't have an answer. What are the things happening in the culture that you've been wondering whether the Bible has anything to say about these? And let them write it out on their cards, then take all the cards and lay them out, start matching them up. And you'll come up with a sermon series on, apologetics, a sermon series on cultural engagement, a sermon series on worldview, just to start building the foundation for people. And you're doing it based on what they're asking because they told you. That's how we developed our curriculum here. In fact, we continually redevelop it based on the questions students are asking right now.
Yeah, you talk about these life's big questions, right? You've written about that. You teach on it. I'm dying to know what are life's big questions.
The biggest question students are asking about themselves is, what is my purpose? Why am I here? Because in my biology class, I just learned that I'm no different than an animal. My only purpose in life is to survive, to live another day, and to reproduce. Is there anything beyond that? All world religions try to answer that question, but it's in biblical Christianity, based in the teachings of Jesus, that you find that you're not just on a search for God, God's searching for you. And he seeks you. He seeks that relationship with you. He sent his son to be, to be here, to be the intermediary between God and man. And it's the biggest philosophical question of all time. Can we know anything? I mean, the Greeks wondered. This is why all the Greek philosophers did what they did. They're wondering. We don't think this world is real because, the universe is eternal. Then it never really came into existence. But we think what's real is out there somewhere. But how do we find it? And they use this word logos. This is how you find it. It's the logos is the connecting point. Well, that's what John said about Jesus. He said, in the beginning was the logos, the word of God, and the word was with God, and the word was God. That Jesus literally is the connecting point between the eternal reality, the immaterial world, the world of ideas, and our everyday lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the students who get to take advantage of your programs and who get to go through them are certainly blessed to be able to do so. What would you say to those who maybe can't get themselves to Manitou Springs, or they just don't have a support system around them, anyone they can turn to, or maybe they've tried church or talking to a pastor and it wasn't clicking for them. Maybe they just can pick up a Bible. I mean, what's your recommendation? How do people who are questioning that very thing start? Where do they start?
Well, I'm going to recommend that people look at the resources we have available at summit.org, because those programs are available there, but also other courses, small group courses, courses for churches, courses for homeschools, courses for public school students. We have 300 schools in 12 states who can use Summit Ministries curriculum in public schools through what's called release time, Christian schools. And then all the big questions, our faculty members do short videos and articles and things answering some of those big questions. I want people to pick up their Bible and start reading. I recommend they start with the Gospel of John. And as you read, the more confused you get, the more you want to be looking for resources for how are we to read the Bible? Is it just sort of a potluck? I just turn to a random page and see if I can find any meaning in it? Or is this actually the story of all of reality? Because what we teach our students is there's a meta-narrative from Genesis to Revelation. The big question in life for you is not what is my story, it is what story am I in? Because history is going somewhere, and it is going there on purpose, and we can understand where we fit in it. But if we're reading the Bible in a self-centered way, well, what this means to me is, we're never going to get there. So it takes time. I also encourage people to read. I wrote a book called Truth Changes Everything, to talk about how people who believed that Jesus is the truth changed the course of history and science and in the arts and medicine and education and politics and law and all of those kinds of things. So we can get a vision for the difference that truth really makes.
Yeah, and you've got a book on your website right now that, am I right in understanding that you are offering this book on Israel to anyone who'd like it? Are you still doing that?
Yes. Anybody who wants to get a copy of that book, I'll just give it to you. Just go to summit.org/Israel. The book is called Should Christians Support Israel? And it does talk about the Israel-Palestine issue, because I think that's one issue that a lot of people say, frankly, it's impossible. Can we find a biblical worldview in an impossible situation? So we're not trying to tackle the easy topics. We're taking the toughest ones. But there's also a huge part of the book, Kyle, that focuses on how you de-radicalize Gen Z. What do you actually say in a conversation? What kinds of questions do you ask? How do you bring up the key issues? Because we want them to come to a knowledge of the truth as much as we want to be able to come to a knowledge of the truth.
Well, thank goodness. Thank you for offering that and for writing it and understanding that that's such a need right now. Jeff, you've shared so much wisdom today, and I want to leave our listeners with one thing. I want to ask you one last question. Of course, it's a big one because I've asked you a bunch of big questions today, but you're just fielding them beautifully. What's the one thing that you wish every young person knew?
This answer could change over time for me, but I'll tell you what's on my heart right now. I want them to know the difference between optimism and hope. When I traveled to Israel, spent so much time with people who had been survivors of October 7th, hostage families, people in the IDF who were citizen soldiers, I continually asked them, where is the hope in all of this? And they said, well, we distinguish between optimism and hope. Optimism is a good feeling about something. Hope is a belief that your personal action makes a difference in the future. And that is what I wish for this rising generation, that we could find not just a way to feel good about our lives, but a genuine sense of hope that says, I'm going to dig in. This is hard, but hard is hard, but hard is not bad. Hard is just hard. And we can do this. We can seek hope and be people of hope.
Well, beautifully said. And a beautiful way to end such a great conversation. Dr. Jeff Myers, I can't thank you enough for sharing from your heart and just this wealth of really, tough and brilliant and good and bad experience that has, led you down this path to be who you are and doing what you're doing for these kids and for our country. So I'm very grateful to you for your time today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really hope that you will join us again on the show in the future.
Thank you, Kyle. I'd be happy to do that. And thank you for being a person who brings up the tough topics and asks the tough questions. I just can't tell you how encouraged I am.
I'm so glad. So important to do. And we're getting there, right? We're getting there. Well, thank you, sir. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so that you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.